So welcome, Mike, to City Council. It's great that you've come and to present to us. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Your Worship, and to all of you, first off, congratulations on, this is my first chance to appear before the new council since the election. I think you'll agree we have a tremendous working relationship between the city and Canadian Pacific. We look forward to that continuing. There's a lot of exciting projects to come, and happy to address those today. My comments today are going to be largely geared towards the movement of dangerous goods. I will address coal dust. I will address the Ross Street underpass as well, but I want to focus most of our time on the movement of dangerous goods, which is a very topical issue at the moment. To lead us off, wanted to start with how we do things at CP. Our core values, our foundations, are to provide service, control costs, optimize our assets, develop our people, and operate safely. And those are all things that touch on the city of Salmon Arm. Within that, through our values of accountability, diversity, and pride in what we do, we strive to be the best. And I'm proud to tell you that we are the industry leader when it comes to safety. We have been for over a decade. Our industry leading performance continued through last year. And safety is something that we can never be satisfied with our performance on. It is a process of continuous improvement. It's a process that matters for the communities where we operate as well. As all of you can appreciate, we are required by law to move all manner of goods, including dangerous goods. And I did have a quiz, but I'm going to blast through it rather than putting all of you on the spot. Important things to understand out of what we are required to do is we must, as an operating company providing a transportation service, we are required in Canadian law to move all manner of goods, including goods listed as dangerous goods under the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Act and associated regulations. That requirement is in the Canada Transportation Act, and there are similar requirements in US law. What that gives you is a very consistent regulatory environment from coast to coast. The requirements are the same regardless of where we operate. Similar to the fact that you, as a municipal body, must have an emergency plan. We too have an emergency plan. We also have a lot of emergency equipment that we bring to the table and training. In fact, just confirmed with the chief beforehand and our dangerous goods officer that we are doing training here in Salmon Arm on the 30th and 31st of March. And that is something we do in an ongoing manner. We also have a variety of emergency equipment which we can deploy, that you see pictures of it there and its locations. I think probably most relevant for Salmon Arm are boom caches, of which we have a number, and these can be rapidly deployed if needed. On the emergency planning side, we have an emergency action plan as a company, similar to your emergency management plan. We have enhanced training for our company officers. That includes myself. I qualified with ICS 300 in the fall. That is being rolled out to all our operating officers right now. The idea being, as we experience incidents, the one common feature that occurs between incidents is not so much their cause, it's how we communicate. How we communicate with emergency responders, how we communicate with elected officials, and it's critical that that communication be consistent. So we are adopting the incident command structure and training our officers in ICS so that they speak the same language as the fire chief, as the fire department. And the goal, of course, in any emergency response is going to be to establish a unified command at the outset so that this information is as free-flowing as possible. There will come a point in any incident where the public safety risk is completely managed. And at that point, command would transfer back to us to continue with the cleanup, continue with the reconstruction. Until that point, our goal is to have a unified command with first responders. We simply find it is the most effective way to work together to achieve the result we all want, which is minimal risk to property and people. In terms of information sharing, there's a variety of tools that are made available either through government statute or through innovations that we have created. Previous federal government established an information sharing regime between fire departments and the railroad for the movement of dangerous goods. We call it a flow analysis or a traffic density study, and you see it on the left-hand side of the slide there. It's a list segmented by quarter of every dangerous goods we move through a given community. It is provided to fire departments under a confidentiality, and I'll get into that in a second. More active, more real time than a quarterly report in a density study is an app which the rail industry has developed specifically for first responders. All rail cars in North America operate off a common database. So we know, based on a car number, which is kind of like a license plate, a unique set of letters and numbers that is on every rail car in North America, we know where that car is, we know whether it's loaded or not, and what it's carrying. We've developed an app called Ask Rail, which is provided to fire departments that gives them the ability to, in real time, look up a given car. All you do is plug in the car number at the top, and you get the information below immediately. You also get the link to the Transport Canada Emergency Response Guide, the Orange Book as it is known. Finally, under the View Train, you can see what's next to it. And here's the power of technology when it comes to emergency response. That was added into the functionality of the app subsequent to its launch. What it does is it gives first responders an idea of what is immediately next to a given car. Sometimes that's a very important consideration as you plan your response. So now you have visibility not only to the car of interest, but to everything on either side. Now, both the traffic density study and the Ask Rail app are available only to first responders. There's a good reason for that. One, our regulator required that level of confidentiality, but two, sadly in the world we live in, we do not want a bullseye on our train. So the information is treated with confidentiality and the information is in the hands of those that need it most. I'm going to skip some facts here on the efficiency of freight rail, but I'm going to skip over this except to say one freight train equals approximately 280 trucks off our publicly funded highways. And in a city like Salmon Arm, where the Trans-Canada Highway bisects the community, 280 trucks has real meaning. It's very unusual that we ever add a train to our service. We do lengthen them out, depending on demand, but the number of trains that we operate in a given 24-hour period tends to be fairly static. And that's because we're able to manage additional volume simply by adding cars to the train. So when our traffic increases, and we've been on an upswing over the last couple of years, when our traffic increases, you don't necessarily see additional trains through Salmon Arm on a given day. Finally, this is the last slide in the presentation, and then I'll talk, and it's a good segue into the city directly. In 2013, your trade association, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and my trade association, the Railway Association of Canada, jointly launched guidelines for development in communities across the country. These are guidelines. They are not canon. You are not entirely subject to them. I would, however, encourage you to review the guidelines and look to adopt them as part of your community planning apparatus. They give you some guidance on how to look at development in direct proximity to the tracks. Now, all of you can appreciate that rail is, by its very nature, an industrial activity. Yet, in this community, in many, many, many other communities, we have people in direct proximity to the tracks, and that creates some additional pressures when we have an incident. It requires additional planning and additional resources for your fire department. It requires additional assets from our perspective. We can't change what's already there. But on a go-forward basis, as you look at development occurring next to the CP right-of-way, I would encourage the city to adopt the guidelines and use them as part of your development approval process. They're online at proximityissues.ca, and again, I strongly encourage this on a go-forward basis. And that I'll segue into Ross Street on that basis. We were obviously very happy with the outcome of the referendum during the municipal election. This, for us, is an exciting project. It's going to remove one of the riskier crossings that we have within British Columbia. Once the underpass is constructed, we're very satisfied with the progress and negotiations with the city. And I really, on behalf of my team at CP, want to acknowledge the superb work of your CAO and Director of Engineering, who are leading the negotiations for the city. Everybody is working together on this. There's excellent information flow, and we look forward to progressing the project. But I want to acknowledge the excellent work that has been done by city staff on this project. The other one that I want to address is coal dust. I'm very happy to see our friend here in chambers today. It was a little over a year ago, I'm going to say, we started talking about this. As a result of concerns about coal dust, we ran a pilot project last summer with what's called a wet down facility just west of Revelstoke to the coal, which all comes out of the Kootenays. It is metallurgical coal used in the formation of steel. All comes out of 5 mines in the Kootenays. And as it is put in the rail cars, it is sealed in with a sealant. Cars then come west, and just to the west of us at Tappan, they are resealed on their way to the coast. We have, for a number of years, had an issue with coal dust, especially in the hotter months of the summer, through the Shuswap. So we constructed this wet down facility to reactivate the sealant. The chemists told us that it would work. We were a little skeptical because it was frankly a lot less technological than the Tappan respray. Following our trial last summer, we were very satisfied with the results, and our plan is to proceed again this summer using the wet down. And we're going to, on a go-forward basis, we're going to look at ways to improve its effectiveness, improve its efficiency, and treat it with a continual improvement. But our plan is to proceed with it again this year. That concludes my formal remarks. I do welcome your questions, and they don't need to be specifically about dangerous goods, though I suspect there will be a question or two about crude, and I'm happy to address that. So thank you for your attention. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Great, thank you very much, Mike, and we do appreciate the partnership that we have with CP and your communication with me and with the city, much appreciated. And as you mentioned, our staff often are communicated with and work with you, so we really appreciate the relationship we have. I will open it up to questions from council. Council, do you have questions for Mike? Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I just had a question about that Ask Rail.
Sure.
Is that an app?
It is an app.
And is it something you said that our fire department has access to?
Yes. Yes.
So I guess I would ask,
This is it.
has our fire department accessed it and used that app? Do you know?
We're certainly aware of it. We've not had to use it, but we're certainly aware of it, yes.
So I guess you haven't done like a little test on it to see if you can,
It's actually, this is a really good question.
yeah.
The app is operated by it's a jointly owned company owned by all the railroads called Railink that developed the app, and it manages the railcar database. And it is actively monitored for people sitting trackside, plugging in car numbers, and seeing what's in them. And questions can be asked by the application developer of users. It's actively tracked. Again, it's more from our perspective, it's protecting proprietary information. We don't have a problem with people looking up, but if we see a spike in requests, we're going to ask why.
So if our fire department just wanted to do it as an exercise, for instance, you said a training opportunity is coming up soon?
Yes.
Just to, get a feel for
It's
how the
absolutely, it's entirely legitimate. It's no different really than a Google search. You simply plug in the car number and the information that's in front of you comes out.
Okay.
It is, and I, forgive me, with roughly 400 communities that I liaise with, I don't recall off the top of my head if the City of Salmon Arm Fire Department has downloaded the app or not. But it's something we can certainly, if in fact it hasn't been provided, it's easily provided. We simply work on it offline and we'll get it done.
And then the other question I had is you said the increase of the amount of trains doesn't necessarily change, just the amount of carts.
Correct.
Or cars that you can add to it.
Correct.
So how many trains do we have that?
There's some seasonal variability to it, but it is a safe number would be approximately 30 trains per 24 hours in both directions. So roughly 15 in either direction. And that, again, that'll depend on the condition of the harvest on the prairies, whether or not we are entering in the run-up to, say, the Christmas retail period when intermodal is very strong. But other than that, our volumes are relatively consistent over time. There was a new potash mine that opened a couple of years ago in Saskatchewan that added a daily potash train service. But events like that are relatively rare. So most of the traffic growth that we have is incremental. We have room on the train to accept that growth, so that the number of trains is relatively consistent.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison. Mike, thanks for your presentation here. And excuse me, I certainly thank CP for their involvement with the holiday train and just what absolutely that adds to communities along the way, partnering on the underpass and certainly I'd say the responsiveness on the coal dust. So thank you for that. In 2014, I was actually sitting in the gallery when I think that you presented to council here, and the two things that that completely resonated for me, and there were learning opportunities, was one that rail operations are best viewed as an industrial zone, and I know you've reiterated that today, both in terms of safety and planning, and as well as that rail companies are mandated to transport dangerous goods. I have a couple of more granular questions, and they're not intended to be zingers here, but and actually not particularly focused on crude either. But is there a way of getting, and I understand that for proprietary and safety reasons, information is shared quarterly with fire departments, I'm fine with that. Is there a mechanism to get some sort of, for a city council, of a cumulative overview that's not granular enough to impact proprietary information?
I think that's a discussion you have with your emergency planning apparatus. They're well aware of what they can share with you and what they can't. And so I would suggest that's the way you do it.
Is there an option there for an annualized, over the past 4 years, I'm just making something up here, but sort of rolling 5-year average over the past of what the percentage of dangerous goods are passing through Salmon?
It's, the short answer is no. The information is communicated either through the flow analysis or through the Ask Rail app in real time. And that the flow analysis is helpful when it comes to emergency planning, because you can see that there are going to be some, with, take a given dangerous commodity, say ammonia, it's a good one. Ammonia is used in the production of pulp. It is used in the production of fertilizer. So obviously, timed to a broader planting season, they're going to see a couple of spikes in terms of ammonia transportation in a given year. And that flow analysis will reflect that because it's broken down by quarter. Again, it is seen as a planning tool first and foremost, because the reality is the Emergency Management Act that mandates you to have an emergency plan has to contemplate all contingencies. So it's less about what is and more acknowledge the fact that there are in fact dangerous goods moving through town, both on rail and on the highway, and you need to be prepared to respond should an incident occur.
So thank you for that, and I think I understand that. So there's no general metric to say, hey, in Salmon Arm, in the past 4 years, dangerous goods have increased by 10%, and
not specifically. If you want, I can tell you system-wide for us, so system-wide is 6 Canadian provinces, 12 American states. Dangerous goods, so those products listed under the Transportation Dangerous Goods Act and regulations make up about 3% of our traffic. It's not, so 97% of what we move is benign. And, I'll expand on that a little. You see tank cars coming through town every day. If those tank cars do not have a placard on them, then they may well be carrying a product, but it is not a dangerous good. Good example of that would be canola oil, which is not a product listed under the TDG, but a product we move a great deal of volume in. So just because you see a tank car doesn't mean it is necessarily a dangerous good.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I think I understand that as well. So, a couple more questions, Your Worship, if that's okay. Yes, so the shipper, CP Rail, is responsible for cleanup. Is that a full liability, or is that capped in any way?
It's a full liability.
It's a full liability. And the definition of cleanup is 100%?
100%.
And does that include remediation as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And that's pretty well my dangerous good questions. I had one other one, and I think that not that we're going to resolve this year now, but we have had significant concern with our First Nation neighbors about fatalities between here and west of Pierce Point. These are tragic circumstances that impact everyone from CP Rail and staff to community to First Nation communities. Could you update us a little bit on your understanding of what's next in the process with Nisconnet and Adams Lake Bend?
And thank you for asking. It is absolutely a concern we all share, first off. I personally have at times been engaged in those meetings. Currently, our manager of Aboriginal Relations is engaged along with the CP Police Service and participated in the most recent meetings here in the city with the affected Indigenous nations and City, CSRD, Shuswap Trails Alliance. Essentially, at the moment, we are waiting for First Nations to come back with a request to proceed with identifying some options. We're open-minded about how we might participate, but I think we need to give the process the time it deserves. I know there's some pent-up demand there, but as I understand it, right now it's an internal matter to the affected nations, and we'll respect that process and await the outcome.
Okay, so I'm certainly appreciative of that answer, and it's not just this is a concern of everybody, including CP Rail, and certainly I think that down the line, Your Worship, we'd probably like to be part of those discussions as well when they move forward. So thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for your presentation and your partnership and all of your work with our staff with regards to the underpass. I think we may have a question for you before you leave today for some correspondence, but we'll talk about that. I just needed a little clarity around the coal dust spray.
Sure.
So I was confused, I think, by what you stated. It's sealed in the East Kootenays.
Correct.
Comes up through Golden, comes east or west through Salmon Arm. There's the spray or respray occurs in Tappan.
Correct.
And the communication from, I mean, to me it was a great process to watch. Very concerned local citizen or citizens group gets involved through the city, through you, and you've come up with a solution. So the solution is the respray station in Tappan or before Salmon Arm?
It's before Salmon Arm.
Okay,
sure. So I'm going to move back to the map.
It was handled so well I didn't really pay attention.
Whoops, went the wrong way. Sorry about that. There. This is not really helpful, but the coal supply chain is basically a giant conveyor belt, about 1,000 kilometers. So out of the Kootenays, coal is loaded at 5 mines, and then before the trains depart those mines, sealant is applied. And then to your point, Councillor, trains proceed north and then west. For over 20 years, we have had a respray facility that resprays the trains on the grade on the way up Tappan Hill. Okay. And you can see if you drive out Tappan Valley Road, you can drive right over top of it. Most people don't even realize it's there. And that has been very effective in managing any type of coal dust going to the coast. The interesting little fact, we started spraying the trains not because of coal dust, but because one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a train is to have a shifting load. And the sealant stops the coal from shifting around or settling around in the car. And that was the primary reason that the sealant was introduced. It has the happy side effect of preventing dust, but that was not originally the goal. The chemical formulation of the sealant is such that it's a water-based polymer, or a water-based. Water is what activates the polymer ingredients, and so reactivating it using water was the advice that we got from the chemists that produce, it's called a flocculant, that produce that flocculant. And that's what the wet down facility, which is about 7 miles west of Revelstoke, again on a grade, so that the train is already traveling slowly, relatively speaking, and each car is sprayed with water. That gives the flocculant time to dry again and to reform the crust before we enter populated areas along the Shuswap.
And last year was the first year that was done?
Correct. Correct.
And you're going to do it this year?
And our plan is to reactivate it again during the warm months. Obviously, at this time of year with water, it would be ineffective based on temperature. But our experience is that the dusting is an issue during periods of very hot, low humidity. And so we believe this is an effective solution.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation, very timely. I don't know, I think a Director of Corporate Services, or was it Director of Engineering and Public Works, as our CSRD rep, I asked them to arrange with staff to come and present the SEP program, Shuswap Emergency Program. I think that's going to be in April.
Through your worship, yes, I've been in touch with Derek Sutherland about possible days for presentation, and it looks like April or May.
Okay, so your timing is very good because some of what you've presented.
I will be making the same presentation to the Shuswap Emergency Program. Yeah. It's already scheduled.
Yeah, and they're coming to present to us, so this is good.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and thank you, Council. Thank you, Mike, for coming and meeting with us and bringing us good news about the wet down facility. It's much appreciated. I know our residents will appreciate it, and for running the pilot and learning from that. My only question is sort of related to Councillor Cannon's. How long can trains be?
There's no physical limitation. There is some infrastructure limitations.
Okay.
CP's operation across Canada is largely what we call single mainline track. One track with occasional passing sidings where two trains can meet, such as we have in Salmon. So if you have two trains whose lengths exceed the limits of our sidings, well, then you've got a standoff. So we need to be cognizant when we are planning our operation on the abilities of our network. Right now, our design standard has sidings roughly 7,500 to 8,000 feet in length. We're pushing that out through our capital investment program to roughly 10,000 feet. The siding here in Salmon Arm is just a shade over 10,000 feet now. So that work was done a number of years ago. And ultimately, I do think you will see trains, an average train length going from what it is right now, and I'm going by memory on this, but I think in our most recent results, which were released a month ago, our train length average was about 7,600 feet, 7,700 feet. Again, it is our corporate goal to lengthen that out and to increase the volume of goods moving on each train.
That's one more good reason to build the Ross Street underpass, because it's not necessarily the number of trains that holds you up, it's only one. But if it's very long, you are held up for a longer period of time. Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming and presenting to us.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Okay. I'll do that differently. Okay, we are going to move now to number 11, correspondence, informational correspondence. And I can see that staff have it up on the screen. I just wanted to, I know council is aware of the lettering system, and when I looked at the letters, the differentiation between A means that action is requested by the person who wrote the letter. Doesn't mean that we have to respond to that, but there is an action requested. R means a response is required. So that's the difference between those two. I will open up informational correspondence to any councillors that would like to speak to them. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about number 9, the Shuswap Family Center.
Thank you.
So they are looking for, I haven't participated in this, but they're looking for mayor and council to help with this volunteer dinner. So I don't know if we need a motion or whether we're all just gonna mark it on our calendar, but I think that we should help them out with this volunteer dinner.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. And yes, in the past, we have, most of us who have been able to get there have gone and helped serve spaghetti and things like that. It's a great thing to go to. So I think I'll leave it up to individual councillors to respond.
Okay,
To
perfect.
that email, and as many as can make it are are very much encouraged.
Okay, and I had one more.
Yes, continue, please.
We had a letter from the number 4 Interior Health Lab wait times, requesting for the mayor to get a hold of Interior Health, but I think this is something that's kind of out of our jurisdiction because the lab waits at Interior Health really is an Interior Health item, and I think what happens with the lab up there is that I believe they open up at 7 and people come at like 6 o'clock because they haven't eaten till the day before and they're, hoping to get in there. So the fact that people are waiting outside, I don't know if that's something that we're able to help in that matter. So I just wanted to bring that to council's attention about the lab waits.
Thank you for that, Councillor Cannon. I appreciate and your expertise there. Would it, do you think it would be suitable for me to forward that correspondence on to Interior Health then and let them?
Yeah, I'm thinking Interior Health Board as well as the Health Minister is what I would do with that.
Would we need a motion to ask staff to do that, or would it be okay just to direct?
No motion is required.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thanks for that suggestion. I appreciate that.
Okay, and then I had one other was from number 10. I just wanted to say I was involved on that fundraising committee, and I would have to say it's almost a dream team, that committee. I've been involved with it for so many years for the Trail Alliance fundraiser. And I actually went out of town right after the night of that fundraiser, and it was pretty exciting to see that we surpassed all our other totals in the fundraiser. So it was a really well-attended event, and thank you to Mayor and Council for having a donation that got us quite a bit of money at the auction, so thank you. And
Thank
that's
you, Councillor
everything.
Cannon. Any other items?
No, that's good.
Okay, other councillors have items. Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Your worship, if I could, item 1,
Yes, thank you.
protest on the Trans-Canada Highway, is this something that can be forwarded to the RCMP for information, that there's a concern?
I think that would be appropriate.
Oh, thank you. And then item 3. So all of council has received this inquiry. Can I get clarity around process? If you are going to run an Airbnb, you do need a business permit in a zone, and B, this is complaint driven, so if someone were so inclined, they would have to file a complaint directly with the city?
Thank you for the question. Director of Development Services.
Your worship, I looked at this letter and thought about it quite a bit over the weekend, and basically the first thing I can say is we don't have a bylaw or regulatory framework to regulate Airbnb or VRBO or any other platform that people use to rent out their properties. On a short-term basis, on any term basis. We also don't regulate say for example, a house that is zoned R8 with a suite in it, we don't have a bylaw that says the owner of the house has to reside in the house. So it's quite common, the complaints that we get are related to dwellings where the owner is absent, absentee landowners. They're renting out the top floor, they're renting out the bottom floor. In some cases, they're renting out several suites in a house. And with those ones, we're able to actually follow up with monitoring and sometimes enforcement. But as council is aware, we don't actively enforce our illegal suites or non-conforming suites. We have a sort of a hands-off approach. In Maple Woods, all the properties in there are zoned to allow for a single family residence, and that is up to 5 people unrelated. Also on top of that, literally on top of it, there can be a suite with another 5 people unrelated. But again, we don't have a regulation to monitor, regulate, and enforce time limits.
But your worship, is an Airbnb, is a B&B a permitted use? And could a business license be issued?
Director of Development Services?
A bed and breakfast is a permitted use in the CD7 zone, which is Maple Woods. It's a permitted use in the R1 zone and a number of other residential zones, but it's an old-fashioned type B&B. Like, the definition is it's not really old, but it's been around longer than I've been here, since the 90s. And it's really intended for the owner of the house to live in the house and to allow for the house to have some let rooms. And the owner of the house prepares a breakfast,
Right.
The traditional B&B. We don't require business licenses for Airbnb or VRBO. Last time I checked on Friday, there was about 18 Airbnbs in Salmon Arm. In the summer, that number goes up, it fluctuates, and there's 2 Airbnbs right now in the Maplewood subdivision.
Okay. Your worship, I would suggest was not something we're going to sort out today, but I do see it as an emerging issue, and I would welcome more letting staff give us direction on where we could or should or could go with this or not go at all, I guess.
Yeah, others may want to speak to that. I would like to later, but we'll open it up for others. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, you don't have any other articles right now?
No, that was it. Thank you,
Okay,
worship.
Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and this was one of mine as well, so it's helpful for me to know. So Airbnb or short-term rentals are not required to have a business license. I mean, I've stayed at short-term rentals. I know that it's certainly problematic for housing supply, and it's also very problematic for enforcement of short-term rentals, and there's been a number of people and a number of local governments that have tried this, and often they spend more money on the enforcement than and real questions of efficacy. I'm not asking for a rewrite now on that, but is that something that we could anticipate at some point down the line of a discussion of having a bylaw for a business license? And I guess associated with that would be referencing that to BC assessment as well, that a business is happening in that residence.
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, I was anticipating a question about providing a report to council on this. It really is a matter of priorities. And if we're going to talk about what the priorities are of my department and other departments, I think we should have that discussion, and I can tell you where that would fit.
Which would be low. Okay, we understand.
And just if I may add too, we don't require business licenses for owners who rent out their house. So there's no regulation of that from the city for renting out your house.
Great, thank you. And that's it for me on this matter. Perhaps others want to speak to that. I do have some others, but I'll...
Councillor Flynn, were you planning on speaking to that item?
Yeah.
Okay, do you mind if we just flip to Councillor Flynn, then we'll come back to you, if you don't mind pressing your button again, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Director of Development Services, for answering all the questions. I think this person is owed some kind of reply. I'm not sure who should reply, but I think some of their issues are the same issues you could have with any neighbor. And it's not, to me, about Airbnb, and it's multiple cars coming and going. That can happen with an owner that lives beside you. Cigarette and cigar smoke, marijuana smoke never used to be an issue, but we can't control people smoking. I think this is about respect, and unfortunately it appears some of the people who have rented the Airbnb don't have respect. I see us addressing this issue maybe a long time down the road. I think that these people should be replied to, and I think they should be reminded that our bylaw system is a complaint enforced. And it sounds like the after hours issue, they could call the RCMP. We have a noise bylaw, and that I believe is enforced by our RCMP. And to me, the loud parties at night with obscene language is a noise bylaw issue. And perhaps we should find out the address that they're concerned about, and both our bylaw officer and our bylaw enforcement and the RCMP should be informed. Clearly they can't do anything unless it's actually happening, but it does concern me, but I do understand that there's not really necessarily a legislative solution. If it's any good news, Airbnbs have now decided to contribute to MDRT taxation across the province. But I don't know that I want to get into regulating Airbnbs, and I'm not sure that the solution is ours to deal with today, but I would like somebody to reply and educate, because that's one thing I do find is that when people understand, they might not agree, but they at least have a better understanding of what we can and cannot do. So I don't think we need a motion for staff to reply, or the mayor or somebody, but I would ask that somebody at least reply to these people.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And I would add on too, I think, just as staff, I think all of us up here are thinking, gee, this isn't really right for this person who lives in this house to have this beside them. Yeah. But we're stretching to try to find out what to do about it. My suggestion, I think, would be similar to Councillor Flynn's. If it was to the degree where the RCMP needed to be called, then that would probably be the best route, I think, in this. I do know the other piece, and I don't know if it's helpful here, is the Airbnb, of course, has a reporting process where both the renter and the owner report each time. Now, if the renter or if the person owning the house is concerned about who goes in their house, they look on there and they can turn them down, which can be helpful. So those would be my suggestions, but I agree. I'm sure staff would reply to the person who wrote this. Any other comments on that particular item? Okay, Councillor Flynn, did you want to, is there other items you would like to speak to?
Well, I think I'll go back to the order. Well, the only one that said R, or sorry, said, R, I'm struggling providing support because there was so little detail. It was, we haven't decided how we're going to do this and what time and what we're going to do. And the way I'm reading it is it's potentially a community Easter egg hunt. Can we make a motion based on such a vague letter to say to staff, work with this organization? And do we want to allow that use in our police park?
Okay, let's ask the Director of Corporate Services what the process would be, because it looks like the person has contacted her.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was contacted by Karen regarding the request, and at this time it appears they're looking to have a church service followed by an Easter egg hunt, and they would be looking to use the green space as well as the gazebo. And in previous requests, individuals and groups have come to council asking for that permission, and so I've brought this forward. However, details are not finalized yet. They're not sure if they're going to provide food and how that's going to look. I did indicate that if they were looking to provide food, that they needed to contact Interior Health. It sounds like they're not planning on using vendors. So there are a few details that are up in the air, but they are looking for council support of the use of Marine Park, and they would pay Shuswap Recreation Society for that rental.
Okay, thank you for those details. Councillor Flynn, do you wish to comment further?
Clearly, like any other use, if we approved it, they would have to have the proper liability insurance in place, because I can see a food safe liability, which isn't our issue, but a liability issue overall, that would be dealt with. I guess my question, I know there's been times when we haven't approved uses in Marine Peace Park because of the fact it's called Marine Peace Park. Is this a usage that has been done in the past?
Director of Corporate Services?
Through your worship, I'm not aware of a church service being permitted in that park previously, but church services have been held on city property and other locations in the past.
Thank you. Do you wish to pass it on, Councillor Flynn?
Yeah.
Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, your worship. I'm not in favor of this request, actually. I think we do have other public areas that these activities can take place in. I think that the Wharf Marine Park is our imminent public space. I have one question. I think, have we permitted weddings to take place in the past there? Through your
Director
worship?
of Corporate Services?
Through your worship, yes, weddings have taken place. They are to be limited somewhat to the gazebo area and not encroaching too much onto the green space. It has been the practice for several years for all large-scale events to be vetted by council first.
Yes, thanks, and I'm aware of that. So I have to say just my personal view on this. I think that private bookings, I would personally extend that to political events and rallies or registered political groups or protest rallies. And again, I would extend that to religious organizations as well, whether they be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or pagan, that it's our preeminent public space. I think it's I'm certainly in favor of widely supported public events and things like that, but I don't, I personally do not support the use of our preeminent space here. There is lots of opportunity for other public areas to for this to take place.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. There is no motion on this item at this time. So, Councillor Lavery, did you have some other items you want to speak to?
I did have some others, but perhaps people want to, I'm not speak to this one.
Okay. You're okay if we bump you again? Okay, thank you, Councillor Lavery. You're very cooperative. Councillor Lindgren.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, we're talking about the gazebo where Wednesdays on the Wharf happens? Okay, so we have in fact allowed, I don't know if this council has been part of it or not, but Lakeside Church does meet there regularly, several times during the summer, and including Easter Sunday on a number of occasions for exactly this exact event. A church service with a children's activity, including an Easter egg hunt. I've myself have participated in it a number of times. So I don't have any issue with this happening, and I'd be happy to make a motion that we allow Living Waters to have an Easter service at the Marine Park on Easter of 2019. I don't know what the date is.
Thank you. Seconder for the motion. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, second the motion. Councillor Lindgren, do you wish to speak to it further, the motion further?
Yeah, it's early on a Sunday morning, I think, is a pretty quiet time down in the Marine Park. I don't think that we're ousting other groups from the park at that time. It's not a rowdy group. It's they're a very well-behaved group of people to have at an open park area. It's well attended by both their congregation. Living Waters is a pretty small congregation, as Lakeside is as well. But it's also a nice space for people who don't normally attend church service to come by, not be approached by people. It's very comfortable. They can sit at the back if they choose, or on the benches across the road, and participate from a distance if they choose to do that.
Thank you. Others who wish to speak to that? Councillor Wallace-Richmond?
Yes. Thanks, Your Worship. Well, I understand Councillor Lavery's concerns. I am supportive of this because it is meant to be a public event, if I understand correctly. I would not support a strict event where you had to either sign in or pay a fee to attend. Absolutely not in favor of that. And the truth is, as Councillor Lindgren said, it may well have been used for this purpose, but not had gone through the proper channels. So I'm more likely to support it now that it may be going through the proper channels, whereas it might not have been such the last time. With very important caveat that all members of the public are involved, and there's no gated entrance and no fee.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Cannon?
I'm in support of it as well, as long as it's open to the public. But I do have a question when they've done it before, but maybe haven't gone through the channels of booking the gazebo. I would ask Development of Corporate Services, Director of Corporate Services, do we charge a rental fee like we do for the weddings that are booked there?
Director of Corporate Services?
Through your worship, yes, there is a rental fee for the gazebo. The green space does not have a rental fee attached, and that's part of this approval process, is that council would allow the use of the green space.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. And I guess I've been here for too long, because I remember numerous times where we've restricted the use of this park, specifically not like other parks, but because it's called Marine Peace Park, we have restricted usage. And I guess I'm extremely concerned that we've got a church group using it without proper liability and without proper approval. Staff had just said that there's no church groups that have ever booked this properly. And now we have church groups using it for actual congregation meetings without approval. So it's not that it's a church group, it's that it's a group of organized people using a facility without going through the proper channels. And it's our peace park. And I know we have specifically said no to a number of requests to use this park because it's the Marine Peace Park. Now, I'm not trying to say that this group is anti-peace by any stretch, but we have put rules and restrictions on this park. Staff feels there hasn't been this occurring, and it sounds like there has been. So I'm probably more concerned about the unauthorized use and use without requesting than I am about voting yes or no for this use. I guess it's a good example of somebody trying to do this properly, and now we find out that there's groups not doing it properly.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I just make a comment before I ask Councillor Lindgren to speak. Of course, most of our bylaws are complaint-driven. And so if someone uses a peace park and no one complains, then we don't seek out a problem. Councillor Flynn's quite right that there has been some uses we've restricted there, and I have voted against those where alcohol was involved in the park. Those are the ones I've voted against. I don't see alcohol being involved in the park here. It seems like would be a peaceful operation open to the public. So I would support this request. Councillor Lindgren. Oh, sorry, press your button again. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a clarification. I'm assuming that Councillor Flynn is talking about going through proper channels must mean coming to the council for approval on this. I know that when Lakeside Church books the gazebo, they do book it with whoever takes care of it, and they get a key delivered to them so that they can use the electricity. And they pay a fee to do so. So I don't think they're intending to circumvent the process. I don't know if anybody knew that you had to go to council to request it.
Thank you. I think we've had lots of discussion on this item. So unless someone has a pressing need to speak again, I'm going to ask the question to be voted on. Director of Corporate Services, did you want to add one more thing?
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to say that there is the potential that the Lakeside Church did book through the Shuswap Recreation Society and that was not communicated. I can't say that with any certainty.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I think we have enough information at least. So I will call a question. Does anybody want to hear the motion, or is everybody satisfied? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Councillor Lavery, Councillor Flynn opposed. Motion passes. Other items we wish to discuss. Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm cognizant of the time here as well.
It's okay.
So I'll quickly try to go
Take as
through
much
here.
time as we need.
Number 8, which is classified as an action requested, but it seems to me in the past it's required a council motion to approve this. So I guess that I'm thinking it maybe should be an R. I'm not sure. If I could clarify that through you, Your Worship, to staff.
Do we need a motion for this? Yes, I see yes happening. If you'd like to make that motion.
And I will make that motion. This has been a successful event, and they've got all the I's dotted and T's crossed.
Super, thank you. Councillor Walsh-Richmond, seconds.
Orientation.
Any discussion on the orienteering club and their permission to use these facilities? Okay, all in favor? Thank you, passed unanimously. Councillor Lavery, did you have any other items?
Yes, one more, Your Worship. Number 7, Ed McDonald, Shuswap Naturalist Club, and request for restriction of recreational drones on the Salmon Arm foreshore. This has been a very intriguing issue as recreational drones have become more popular. It was first brought up this fall when I was chairing the EAC, and we quickly recognized that it's a multi-jurisdictional approach. I'd also defer to Councillor Lindgren, who's taken that on, but I think further discussion has happened as she's chaired the EAC. The request is, and again, I think, I'm not sure what we can do, but the request is to put up signage so that people would not fly recreational drones from some key areas into sensitive ecological areas. So I guess, Your Worship, my first question would be just to hear from staff about that. I have to say, signage without a bylaw, we've just had other discussions of those sort of things, but to get staff input to start off with that, and then following whatever the table discussion is, I have a suggestion for a motion to present to SILGA and hopefully UBCM if it passes the vetting process. I think this is really a provincial issue.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll pass it perhaps to Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Thank you, Worship. So there has been lots of discussion about the use of drones in the aerospace area. Now, there is a no drone fly over the entire city of Salmon Arm, essentially 9-kilometer radius, which is a large area from the airport. So as far as signage goes, we've implemented some signs around the airport itself, and that's the only thing that we require to do. As far as implementing signs or installing signs on the foreshore, that would be something that the city could work cooperatively with the SABNIS on, or SABNIS could fundraise and put the signs up themselves for awareness. But we do not have a budget for that at this point. And also, as mentioned, we don't have any enforcement. It's actually a federal restriction. So anyone flying drones within this aerodrome area, there's height limits, as well as they have to file a flight plan legally. This is for commercial drones. They have to file a flight plan with our airport manager. As far as recreational drones go, I believe that there's height limits, and technically they're not allowed to be flown within this aerodrome area.
Thank you for that information. Councillor Lavery.
Excuse me, thanks, Your Worship. I'll leave it to others about whether we want to proceed personally. I think.
Councillor Lavery, can you press the button one more time? Okay.
You want to There we go.
Now you're okay, then Councillor Lindgren.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll leave it to this table. I think that we should proceed with some signage, informational signage. I really don't know what, I literally really do not know what our jurisdiction is in this matter. We have Transport Canada, we have Nature's Trust, we have FLNRO, we have, from what I understand, trespass law through the province. We have First Nations input into this. I know drones are being flown off of Adams Lake property west of the sewage treatment plant. The request is for signage, I think, at Peter Janet Park, at the wharf, and at the entrance to the trail. I would, I didn't come to make that motion, but I think I'll make that motion that we take, I guess it depends on the cost, but if it's reasonable, we look at something to come out of council initiatives. And through you, Your Worship, then what would be the cost of some informational signage for those 3 locations?
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Just a suggestion, perhaps. First of all, I think the idea is a good one, and I support it. I wonder if we just want to take pause for one meeting. Councillor Lindgren, I believe, is the representative on Sabnus, and that would give staff an opportunity also just to come back with an accurate cost. But if we could, if you agree, if we could put it perhaps on the next agenda, and we could have those pieces of information, then we could discuss it at that time.
Excellent idea. I think that the longer and the better we ponder, the better decisions we have, so without a doubt.
Okay, so Councillor Lindgren, you're comfortable with that, and staff is okay with that. All right, why don't we do that?
Thank you. And then if I could proceed, I think this has provincial implications, and I don't think we are the only jurisdiction that is probably struggling with this. I've been thinking about this for a while. I've done a few quick searches on the database at UBCM on resolutions. The word drone does not show up in any of them. Assuming I'm searching the database correctly, I think I am. I have asked staff, and I think probably we have it on a screen here, to come up with a potential motion. The deadline for it to go to SILGA and then possibly to UBCM, it sort of goes through the jumping hoops for that, is actually March 1st. So I would read this out. I would ask for the indulgence of this table to, normally we do a notice of motion and talk about it in a couple of weeks, as we're going to do with a report back on signage, but we need to make that March 1st, if accepted, we need to make that March 1st SILGA deadline. Whereas flying recreational drones is an increasingly popular hobby that can disturb and pose risks to wildlife in sensitive ecological areas, and recreational drones are prohibited in Canada's national parks for similar reasons, and whereas there are multiple stakeholders, including federal and provincial agencies, and complex regulations involved in drone usage, be it resolved that the federal and provincial governments collaborate to provide clarity and options for local governments in restricting the use of drones in local sensitive ecological areas.
So that your motion would be to forward that from the City of Salmon Arm to SILGA.
Yeah, it would.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Lindgren. Would you like to speak further to that motion?
No.
Okay. Other comments or thoughts on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Lavery.
Your Worship, if I could ask through you if staff could, and I can give them the email address, but forward that to SILGA with the motion, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director of Corporate Services. Councillor Lavery, did you have any other items you wanted to discuss? Okay. Does anyone have any other items they would like to discuss? Okay, I'd just like to talk very briefly about item number 2. This is an informational item. This young person, who I actually don't know, wonders if there's an animal that represents Salmon Arm, because he noted that other towns have animals that represent them. And I didn't know the answer to the question.
Chad might have an answer.
Does anyone know? All right, well, this is something to think about whether we do or not, and whether at some time we want to think about an animal that might represent us. So I put that forward to you as information for you, and I'm going to do some thinking about it as well. All right, let's move on then. We have 11.2 Silga Convention, Penticton, BC, April 30th, that should say, till May 3rd. And we need a motion that would authorize, I believe there's 6 councillors who wish to take part. Okay, and that would be Councillors Eliason, Cannon, Flynn, Lavery, Walls, Richmond, and myself. Seconded and moved. Okay. I'll just check with staff and see if there's anything further they need on that motion.
No.
Okay, thank you. And I know Councillor Lindgren is attending a different conference in that one, so that worked out well. All right, all those in favor of the motion? Thank you, and that of course has been budgeted for. And item 11.3, Patty Thurston, Executive Director. You've probably read this letter. I just asked the Chief Financial Officer perhaps to capsulize the challenge here.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. In January, this letter came to Council, and it was a takeaway directive to myself on whether or not 2018 Council initiatives could have been used to give some sort of funding relief to this organization as a result of a property tax bill that they were required to pay on their new building. We weren't able to use the 2018 Council initiatives because the year had surpassed and we couldn't backdate it. So I've brought this forward, again, just looking to see if there was any additional direction that needed to be provided to at all to use 2019 Council initiatives, or if we would just respond that there's nothing further that can be done.
Okay. Does Council have any questions they wish to ask around this letter? Councillor Walls, Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you to staff, I just to confirm that there are no steps the city didn't take and there are no steps that they didn't take that would have prevented this from happening.
Yes, I would say there may have been a possibility that they could have worked out with their lawyer and the prospective buyer, seller of the 2 properties to come to an arrangement as to proportionate share of taxes, or to reach out to us and what that might be. That wasn't done, and
so it wasn't as a result of an error or an omission on either party's part.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it had to do with timing. So they sold their previous properties in July, I believe, of 2017. Sorry.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, sorry. They sold them in December of 2017. So they had a previous tax exemption on those locations. Once they sold the property, BC Assessment is advised and removes the exemption from them. BC Assessment, as well as the Community Charter, legislates that we have to have those exemptions into them by October 31st of the preceding year to be effective for 2018. So because of that, we were well past the deadline to submit an application for them.
Okay, thanks for that. And while I understand compassionate reasons, I also understand it was a choice and a risk. And if they'd not purchased a new building, they would have rented, in which case they would have had to pay rent. Anyway, long story short, as much as I support the work that they do, I'm not personally comfortable using council initiative funds for this. And not that there's a motion on the table, but I just felt better saying as much.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond, and we do note they do have a tax exemption for 2019. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, I was just, sorry.
Oh, sorry, press again. Thank you.
I just wanted clarity around the letter. To me, confuses 2 issues. It seems to talk about a property tax exemption, which we've talked about today, and they have applied for and received that for 2019?
Yes, on their new location, that's correct.
Because it seems like they're asking for the tax exemption for the improvements, in this letter, which is a different process.
Your worship, so when they were looking into doing some improvements to the building, they were hoping to apply under the downtown tax rebate program, and they're not within the eligible range. So that was a second piece to this, to the permissive exemption. So they were looking for essentially a way that they could potentially recover some of the tax bill they had to pay for 2018.
Okay, so I'm along the same lines as Councillor Wallace Richmond. I don't see this as a use for council initiatives. I empathize, I feel bad, but they've got their exemption for 2019. But the exemption that you're talking about for improvements, it concerns me that with us building an underpass, and this is a whole other issue, and I'll leave it for a meeting when we're not running this late. To me, we're trying to connect the downtown to the waterfront, and I'm not sure why the waterfront wouldn't be part of that opportunity moving forward, but that's a further discussion down the road.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and that will be perhaps a discussion you'd like to bring up at a later time. Any other discussion on this letter? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on through the agenda. Council statements. I'll perhaps start with Councillor Cannon and just move this way if you have a council statement. If not, you can just pass on it. Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Just one.
Yes.
Our Silverbacks made the playoffs. They play our arch rival Vernon. We play in Vernon this weekend, but the home games are the 4th, 6th, and I wrote it down somewhere. 4th, 6th, and hopefully the 9th if it goes to game 6 in Salmon Arm. And we barely squeaked into the 5th spot, so Vernon has home ice advantage, but short road trip, our biggest rival. Let's try to fill the barn.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Yes, Your Worship. One update from the Shuswap Healthy Communities Coalition meeting of last Tuesday. As many of you know, it's a very wide table that's conveyed to share news and views and work on collective impact. We hadn't met for 6 months, partially because of the election and holidays, and but sometimes a long delay is helpful, because what it did show us is collectively these groups have worked on physical literacy, childcare, housing, and new autism programs, and so there was a very long list of things that have been accomplished over the last 6 months. So we look forward to meeting again in April and coming and fine-tuning our goal and coming back to our regional groups to share the objectives, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to be there on behalf of Salmon Arm.
Thank you, and thanks for your work on that, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Councillor Lindgren? Councillor Lavery?
Just one quick thing, Your Worship. The Okanagan Regional Library Board met for the first time. It has 50% new members based on the vagaries of local elections in the fall. And the intent, besides the regular business, is to start to look at this coming fall, the financial allocation model, which determines whether branches are overserved or underserved. And it's been a long discussion. It'll continue to be a long one, but that's where we're going with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just refer to item 14.1, which is my council statement. As some councillors are probably aware, we've signed a communications protocol with other local governments around us, including Indigenous governments. And in our meeting about 6 weeks ago with the Sconlith Indian Band and Adam Lake Indian Band, we were asked by Councillor Gina Johnny if we would be willing, as the City of Salmon Arm, to host the first annual meeting that's related to that communication protocol. I then visited the Adams Lake Chief and Council meeting about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and again was approached by Councillor Johnny and by the Chief there about our willingness to host this first annual meeting. I think it's a great honor to be asked for our city, and I indicated that we were very interested. I've been working with the Director of Corporate Services on this, and we've drafted a possible date as June the 6th. It would be from about 10:30 to 2. And it would be a meeting of elected officials, as is outlined in that communication protocol, to happen at least formally once per year. And we would volunteer to host the first annual meeting. To go along with that, we need some funds to be able to hold that meeting. And so I'd like to make a motion that we access council initiatives, $1,500 from council initiatives, to host the first annual communications protocol meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Flynn, for a second. If this motion passes, you can expect that some information will come to you very shortly. We wanted to get the meeting set early so that as many elected officials as possible will be able to attend. I'll just ask the Director of Corporate Services if there's anything she thinks I've missed that we should add before we discuss the motion further.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think you've covered off all of the important points. We do tentatively have a venue booked, so we know that we can accommodate the group.
Great. Okay, thank you. Any questions from council or comments? Okay, seeing none, all is in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. The time is, yes. Okay. Question and answer period. Are there any questions that people in the audience would like to come forward and ask to council? Okay, seeing none, thank you for attending and for your patience. We will recess until 7 o'clock. Thank you, council.